Today we've got the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. Thanks for coming on.
You bet. Happy to be here.
So we've got this two-track infrastructure process happening. The bipartisan deal is struck. Democrats reiterate that the reconciliation package is moving in tandem. Republicans have a collective fainting spell that the thing Democrats said they were going to do from the start is still what Democrats are doing. So what's the state of negotiations for the American Jobs Plan right now?
Well, clearly they're on break right now as we speak, but they're coming back, and it's in fact, I think I want to say encouraging. There is some hope and a lot of support for the bipartisan infrastructure plan from both sides of the aisle. And there is support, strong support among the progressive community and the Democrats for a reconciliation bill that takes us the rest of the way to get the president's full American Jobs Plan, or what we're calling the Build Back Better plan, through. So I am now, granted, I am an optimist and I am new to DC, so it hasn't crushed my soul yet. But I am excited about the fact that there seems to be momentum toward investing in our country, finally.
So the presence of the reconciliation package hasn't been, a poison pill, hasn't killed the prospect of the bipartisan package thus far.
Well, we had a little hiccup on the right and the left, which tells you that, maybe it's going to happen because there were some that weren't happy on either side. But I do think that there's been a lot of work to try to keep everybody at the table. And so while it's not going to, and who knows, it may have a bigger margin than even what some are predicting, but it's going to be close. I do think it's going to pass, though, because I do think that, the polls that we've seen recently, just on Republicans, independents, and of course, Democrats, people support this investment in the bones of our country. And I think people will, those who don't vote for it, will, I think, have to answer to that back home.
Well, there's this fear that there's going to be too much deference paid to Republicans, even though Democrats have the majority. So are progressives going to have to concede any top agenda items in the American Jobs Plan?
Yeah, we are absolutely committed to all parts of the president's Build Back Better agenda. And particularly, can I just say, as the Secretary of Energy, the parts that take on climate change. So that bipartisan infrastructure framework includes a down payment, if you will, on investments that are needed to take on climate change. For example, record investments to get clean energy on the transmission grid, to expand the capacity of the grid, and in building out those 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. But we have to do more. And so the administration staked out its commitment to do that, to fighting for additional climate elements in the second piece, the reconciliation piece, which would be to add, which is very exciting, it's the long pole in the tent, is the clean energy standard, including clean energy tax credits on a variety, not just wind and solar, but on other things as well, including the manufacturing of clean energy products inside the United States. So, and a civilian conservation corps, which is very cool to be able to get a whole next generation of people who are in the fight to ensure that we save our planet.
Now, I have a bunch of questions on climate change. I do want to stick with the American Jobs Plan just for one quick sec, and that is to ask, if Republicans do bail at the last minute on the bipartisan package, are Democrats prepared to pass everything in the American Jobs Plan?
I'm not going to bite on the question. Not even going to bite. The Republicans, they're not going to bail on it. The Democrats are not going to bail on it. We are working. I mean, I just got off the phone with another member of Congress. I've got another two lined up after you. We are working to make sure everybody stays. So I think we're going to get it through. We're not going to assume the Republicans are going to bail.
All right. We'll see how long that optimism lasts out there.
Right. Don't crush me now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one more question here. And that is that McConnell had come out against linking the Democrat-only bill with the bipartisan bill, even though he knew for weeks that they were advancing in tandem. Does that kind of bad faith behavior push the White House away from seeking bipartisanship?
You know what? The president has said all along he wants to get this agenda passed on these two tracks, which is the bipartisan effort and then the parallel effort through the majority vote reconciliation process. That's not going to be a surprise to anyone. It's not going to be a surprise to anyone on the Republican side. We got this group of 21 senators. Now we have 11 Republicans and 10 Democrats who are working to, take this framework and turn it into legislative language right now. And the president really believes that it's, the bipartisan effort to address these big challenges is super important. It's important here in America, but I would say it's important. And I say this because I talk to a lot of my counterparts in other countries who went through the past 4 years and are like, it was America was so absent in this area of climate change. And now that we're back and they feel like, my God, this is so fantastic. It's fantastic for climate change. It's also fantastic in this argument about whether we're going to support democracy or autocracy. And democracies have to work. And that means you have to get something through Congress in a bipartisan way. And so it's, we're hopeful for many reasons that we're going to have a component of this that is bipartisan, and it looks like we are.
Okay, so let's talk about climate change here. We are seeing record temperatures all across the Pacific Northwest and Oregon, Washington, even Canada. I think Canada went from 113 degree record one day. The very next day they had 116. The following day after that they had 121 degrees. So, breaking the record by 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Does the American Jobs Plan go far enough to combat climate change?
Well, clearly first of all, these record weather events, and that includes Texas from a couple of months ago, right? Should be like a flashing red light that our hair should be on fire, that this is an emergency.
In addition to California and,
Exactly. So, when the president says that he wants to get to 100% clean electricity by 2035, that's just a massive statement. It's hard. It's going to be hard to get there. It's going to be hard to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. These are what we call big, hairy, audacious goals. And so what does he put on the table to be able to get there is this clean energy standard is a huge step in that direction. If we can get a federal clean energy standard, that will go a long way toward reducing, obviously, our responsibility as a country. And now we've got to do the same thing by persuading other countries to do the same. I know everybody talks about how China's building coal plants, et cetera. So we've got to use our allies and a whole wraparound strategy on other countries as well. But we've got to do our part. We've got to stand up and be the example. And that's why, as I say, this clean energy standard that's in the American Jobs Plan or in the Build Back Better plan is really the key, the foundational piece of how we're going to get there.
I know there's, a lot to prepare us to combat or deal with the worst impacts of climate change, but what specific climate provisions are actually included to reduce emissions so that we're not only reacting?
Number one, you got to set out the goal, right? So the net zero carbon emissions is the goal. And the Paris, in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at Paris, it wisely stated that all of these technologies are necessary to get to that goal. And so there's obviously biological, there's ecological ways of capturing carbon and reduce it. There is technological ways as well, carbon capture and sequestration. There is this whole push now among the global communities for clean hydrogen, which is really exciting because it's generated through renewable energies, it's transportable, and it could be baseload power. There's obviously very significant investments. There's significant investments in that, also in energy storage. The whole goal here is to try to get baseload dispatchable clean power. And since the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't always blow, you have to figure out, right, how you can get that power where it needs to go. So you have to have a transmission grid that takes it from places where that power is generated to places where it's used, but you also have to be able to store it for the times you need it. And so the investments in battery technology and that the American Jobs Plan makes are great. The investments that we are doing at DOE in doing the research necessary to get to huge cost reductions in energy storage, that's really great. And obviously the investments in deploying that clean energy, those clean energy solutions, very important.
Now, how would you, for people who don't know, describe carbon capture, and is it ready to be deployed at some type of a mass scale in the US to actually have some impact?
Yeah, so for folks who may not be aware of what it is, so you want to remove CO2, carbon, right, greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere. And if you can capture it before it gets out at a power plant or at an industrial site, you take it and you put it underground in geologic caverns that will never see the light of day. That means you can actually generate power, but you can do it in a way that doesn't release CO2 emissions. Now, the question that you asked is that technology ready? It's ready, but it is still expensive. So you know, for some technologies, so for some fossil fuel generation like coal, it's more challenging because the economics don't often mesh. It's difficult to pencil it in and make a profit, if you will, when you're burning coal and attaching this technology. However, there have been advances in carbon capture that does bring the cost down so that you might be able to see it happening on natural gas, for example. But natural gas has other problems, which includes methane emissions, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas emission. So what's the Biden administration doing on that? The Biden administration is taking really aggressive steps to regulate methane emissions. The Trump administration basically let it go. The Biden administration came in and said, no, we're going to regulate it. You have to make sure that that the pipes don't leak, that you're not seeing flaring, as they say, so that stuff is being released. And by the way, there's a whole bunch of other methane emitters that are out there, like oil and gas wells that are abandoned, that the American Jobs Plan is going to cap. So greenhouse gas emissions overall, whether it's carbon or methane, this plan tackles. And the technology, if you take it to scale, will pencil out in some places, but not in all.
Will there be any plans to link Texas's power grid to the rest of the nation's, after, like you mentioned before, after it's become clear that the state isn't prepared for the challenges posed by the changing climate?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And as your question begs the explanation, which is for your viewers, Texas often has an ethos of being independent, right? And so their power grid, it's called ERCOT, is not connected. Their transmission lines are not connected to anywhere else in the country except for a very small portion of Texas. And that's the way they like it. The problem is that when they're in trouble, that means because they're not connected, we can't send power to them when they need it, nor can they, and they're the number 2 state in the country for solar power, for example. They can't send that solar power out. If they wanted to even make a profit off it and sell it out, they can't do that. So we said, let's connect. We're happy to extend a hand of friendship, a transmission grid connection, if you would accept it. They haven't taken us up on it yet, but I will say this, that they did just decide last week that they were going to invest the amount that was necessary to weatherize their grid. They were told a decade ago that they needed to weatherize their grid, and they didn't do it. So now they have committed to doing that. So hopefully they'll be able to withstand another really cold snap like they did earlier this year. It's more than a cold snap, that serious weather event.
Yeah. Now, there are currently 41,000 electric vehicle charging stations in the U.S. A major concern for people who want to buy EVs is that they'll get stranded, right? A component of the American Jobs Plan is electric vehicle charging stations, but can you quantify that for me? Like, what will this mean in terms of the actual number of charging stations for drivers who are considering or already own electric vehicles?
Yeah, the Biden plan is a great question, really important if we want to really escalate the uptake in electric vehicles, so people we don't have range anxiety. So the Biden plan is to install 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations in areas in the country where there are gaps. And so a lot of the gaps include where they're along the freeways, for example, where it's long distances to be able to charge, or it might include areas where there's not a huge EV penetration yet, electric vehicle penetration, maybe in poorer areas where people aren't buying electric vehicles yet. And so it's a chicken and egg question, right? You're not going to buy an electric vehicle if there's no place to charge it. And you want to make sure that you put charging stations in places that have electric vehicles. So what we want to do is to say that the federal government is going to buy down the risk of that. And we're going to help to subsidize the installation of charging stations, even in areas where you don't have a huge volume yet.
Very, if you build it, they will come energy happening here.
Right.
You know?
I think that's true.
Okay. So last question here, and that is, what specific jobs would be either created or facilitated with the American Jobs Plan? And how are those going to be marketed to blue collar workers who work in fossil fuel related industries, for example, whose jobs are on the chopping block? Because so often those are the people, you know, who Republicans will exploit in fear mongering against moving toward renewable energy.
It's a really great question because, first of all, it's going to create millions of jobs. Why? Because the energy sector is so diverse. So, for example, people who are mining for coal, they could also be mining for geothermal, which is the heat beneath your feet that could be pulled up, which, by the way, is clean, dispatchable, reliable power. We got to do more of that. And so this creates all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people in all pockets of the country. And these are good paying union jobs in many places. It's what's really exciting about it is that there was a report that was done out of Georgetown that analyzed the jobs that would be created. 90% of these jobs in the clean energy sector are jobs that require a high school degree with maybe just a bit of training. You don't have to have a 4-year college degree. And so it includes people who are going to build wind turbines or solar panels, people who will be installing the technologies, people who will be maintaining and ensuring that the technologies are working, people who will be doing upgrades to buildings to make sure that the buildings are energy efficient. That's a lot of, building trades, carpenters, people who move earth pipeline layers. If in those fossil fuel communities, the technologies associated with removing CO2, like carbon capture, that's big technology that has to be installed. You have to build pipes to take it deep into the earth, the CO2. It is a huge job creator for those who like to build things, and also for the people who like logistics and who want to help move equipment with electric vehicles. All of that. It's all kinds of jobs for all kinds of people.
Yeah, well, that's great. And, you have a lot of people here pushing to help make it happen. So, more power to you. With that said, Secretary Granholm, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
You bet. Glad to be on. Thanks so much.